Presentation is going to be on NRCS Job Approval Authority, Maryland Policy and Procedures. Okay, so what is Job Approval Authority? Well, it's certification granted to an individual with the appropriate skills and knowledge to plan, design, or install practice. Why do we do this? Because whatever we're doing practices, they have the potential to affect the environment and public health and safety. We want to make sure that staff is competent enough to know how to design them, when to plan them, and how to install them properly. Sorry about that. It also helps me make sure that that people trust what NRCS plans, designs, and installs, and that helps with other agencies. There's also a federal exemption that applies when with engineering practices when operating under JAA, because of technically what's going on there is you are operating under the state conservation engineer's engineering license. It's his license that all the engineering JAA is covered under. So what types of job approval authority? Well, we have engineering and we have ecological sciences. The ecological sciences job approval authority is relatively new. I think we started it here in like 2014. The practice responsibilities are sort of split up between engineering and ecological sciences. And you can see who has those responsibilities in the National Handbook of Conservation Practices. It's actually in the index, I believe, or the table of contents. And some of them do have both divisions have responsibilities for the practice. So the practice phases. We have inventory and evaluation, we've got design, and then we have construction, implementation, installation. Few terms we use for that interchangeably. Inventory and evaluation is going out and being able to evaluate the situation, conduct a resource inventory that is sufficient to say, okay, this is the practice that's needed in this case, and put it in the conservation plan. So as a conservation planner, you want I&E for all the practices that you might plan. Design is making sure that you design the practice with site-specific specifications that will successfully, get the practice implemented and on the ground. And construction implementation is when you go out to verify that the practice was installed properly, what we sometimes call an as-built or a red line in engineering terminology, but going out, verifying that it was installed correctly, that it meets all the practice standards and specs, that you identify any changes from the original design and document them on the design, and then sign off on that it has been installed properly. And of course, that often leads to payments. So it's important to make sure you're checking it right so that when we do pay somebody, whether it's a state or the federal funds, that we're paying for something that was installed according to designs, or at least in a way that meets standards and specs. If it somewhat changes, and then we need to document those changes. Controlling factors. So controlling factors are the factors that we base job approval authority on different levels of complexity, risk, hazard potential, scale. These are sort of things where we can say, okay, well, if you have this level of knowledge, then you can certify something up to this limit. And then as risk or size increases, then we might require you to have even more knowledge before we let you design or certify that kind of practice. Job class is the level of job approval authority associated with a site-specific design for a practice based on identified controlling factors. And there's actually up to 8 job classes. Only job classes 1 through 4 are applicable to the field level. 5 and up would require state level approval or higher. A lot of this higher level approval authority has to do with engineering practices, particularly where there's potential risk of life, and property damage, particularly with like dams. So our chart caps at class 6, Maryland. So how do you interpret JAA for a practice? So for a practice with one control factor, the approval authority is the maximum level for which an individual can approve a practice. So in this case, you have your job classes here. So job class 1 is non-wildlife, 2 is wildlife. This is for conservation cover. 3 is for pollinator, and 4 with the all means you could do any of these down below it. So all essentially means you could do all of them. And then here's your approval authority. So for designing it, you have a 2. For putting it in a plan, you have a 3. So in this case, someone could put it in the plan that 327 for the purpose of pollinator, but they don't necessarily have the authority to design that practice for pollinators. They could design one for wildlife, but not for pollinators. And then they could also certify one as being installed properly for wildlife, but not for pollinators. Now, sometimes you have 2 or even more controlling factors, and this is when it gets a little more complicated. And the way we interpret it here in Maryland is that you have to have, that it's based on your design approval authority for each controlling factor. In some places, they might say that to certify a practice that's job class 3, you have to have an approval authority for job class for both controlling factors. But in Maryland, we're saying you don't necessarily need that if the practice, the way it's designed, includes hydro seed, but only 6 to 8% slopes, and you have a 3 for site prep and a 2 for slope, then you can approve that practice. When you see job class on the, when you put it on your design, so on the bottom of the engineering sheet or up on the, the implementation requirement sheets, that should be based on the maximum job class that the design requires. So if it's hydro seeding, 68% slopes, the job class for the practice would be a 3, but you still only need a 3 for this controlling factor and a 2 for this controlling factor in order to design it. And that's based on these numbers over here. Okay, so can an individual with the approval authority shown below design a conservation cover practice for pollinators? What's the answer? So they have a design approval authority of 2, pollinators a 3. So no, the answer is no on that one. They could plan it, but they couldn't design it. Can an individual with JA shown below design a critical area planning that requires the use of earth moving equipment on 9% slopes? So you come on down here, so you got earth moving equipment, okay, that's 2. 9% slopes, that's 3. And this is asking if they can design it. So it'd have to be a 2 here and a 3 here. They got a 2 and a 4, so yes. The answer should be yes. They can design that practice in that situation. All right, how do you obtain it? State conservation engineer is responsible for engineering JAA, and state resource con is responsible for ecological sciences. Technical supervisor, typically in the field, that's your district conservationist, is responsible for evaluating and requesting JAA for NRCS, MDA, and district field staff. For the field staff, typically the engineering JAA requests are reviewed and approved by the area engineers. For ecological sciences, it gets sent up to me, and then it's either me or the state technical leads on my staff who might approve it. DCs, ARCs, our area resource cons, area engineers, state tech leads, SRC, and SE are responsible for quality assurance of individuals' JAA. So that's why we do spot checks and also the quality assurance reviews. But, you know, it is sort of an ongoing process too. So people are reviewing stuff occasionally, and you just want to make sure that people are signing off on designs and certifications that meet requirements. So what can you do with the JAA? Well, you can conduct inventory and evaluation for conservation practices and include them in the plan. You can approve your own practice designs. Note that for engineering designs, you shouldn't be designing them, checking the work, and approving them. So you need someone else in one of those steps as a check. And the person who's checking it doesn't necessarily need to have JAA, because they're just sort of checking things, making sure it's okay, checking your calculations. And then you can check and certify practices as applied. You can also approve designs and installation checks completed by someone else who doesn't have sufficient JAA. So you might have another planner or tech in the office that you work with who hasn't gotten to JAA yet. If you have it and you have the level needed for that plan that they're working on or design that they're working on, then you can actually review it and approve it. But what you can't do is delegate JAA to another individual. That can only be done by the state conservation engineer, area engineers, and me and my staff. So to get engineering JAA, you have to demonstrate competency by completing at least 3 designs, meeting all requirements for the practice. They get submitted to the area engineer, they review it, and as long as you were able to submit that design with, you know, essentially no errors, then they can grant you JAA. If it's not granted, then they have to tell you why it was denied and you know what's needed to get there. Same thing sort of goes for ecological scientists. However, we rely more on your district conservationist or your area resource cons to assure that you've met the requirements to get JAA. They evaluate it. Typically, they're the ones who would be working with you as you are practicing or as you are starting to learn how to do these implementation requirement sheets and making sure that you're able to do them right. So they would have to sign it first until you get the JAA. And in that process, they should be reviewing them, providing feedback as to whether or not you're doing them properly and including everything that needs to be concluded. And once you do reach that point, then they can put you in for JAA. You should ultimately be able to submit at least 2 designs that have no errors on them, and that's usually what we would want them to get in order to request JAA software practice. There are some practices on the request sheet where we require you to submit the designs up to us. They should still be reviewed by your DC or someone in the field. But there are practices that are either more complex or relatively new, and we don't know of people having actually designed a lot of them. So we want to get a better look at those. I will say those practices that require the designs to be submitted up to us for ecological sciences are listed on the request form. So upon approval, you get entered into our database, and then you will get a updated job approval chart. This is what it sort of looks like with what your job approval authorities are. And again, you always want to look over here, the maximum approval authority. That's your job approval authority. Quality assurance. Like I said, individual technical staff, supervisors, DCs, a whole bunch of people are responsible for quality assurance. It's an ongoing process, but we do conduct formal spot checks on a 3-year rotation.